So the most recent episode of The Bad Batch has given us a look at how the Empire handles worlds that are maybe less friendly to the idea of falling under Imperial control, and so I figured today we could take a look at exactly how the Empire handled things like Separatist holdouts, and worlds that were maybe less optimistic about the idea of being subjects of the Galactic Empire. I'm Colin, and this is Sci-Fi Deep Dive. Remember, if you enjoyed this video, to head down below and hit that subscribe button. So in the most recent episode of The Bad Batch, we got a really good look at this. We saw the Empire responding to a world that had flat out rejected Imperial rule and asked Imperial leadership to leave using their own militia of commandeered battle droids. And this situation is just one of many where worlds were less than receptive to Imperial control. Now, this isn't uniform across the galaxy. As we see in the first season of The Bad Batch, many worlds were actually very accepting of the reign of the Galactic Empire, but not all of them, particularly the ones in formerly separatist territories. Worlds which weren't loyal to the Republic to begin with, so the idea of a Republic successor state coming in and claiming control was less appreciated. So to understand how the Empire responds to this, we first have to look at these worlds themselves, and why some of them may not necessarily submit right away. And they ultimately break down into two major categories. The first is Separatist holdouts. Separatist holdouts are worlds that maintain the ideology, both political and social, that sort of formed the core of the Confederacy of Independent Systems beliefs. These are worlds that are essentially trying to keep the separatist movement alive on their own worlds, which is understandable as the separatists actually did stand for something. These factions sometimes used old separatist war equipment like battle droids and armored assault tanks. However, they were often just fielding militias of organic beings. This was actually pretty normal across separatist space, and there was a strong push by the Galactic Empire to sort of wipe them off the map. But they weren't the only ones. There were also worlds that simply resisted Imperial rule organically, independent of their allegiances during the Clone Wars. These worlds were a far more interesting case. The Empire had a better political sort of strategy for justifying an attack on a world that had separatist ideals. However, it had a harder time justifying intervening on worlds that were Republic loyal during the war. These worlds, like many of the separatist holdouts, were using mostly militia units in their defense. So you would see organic soldiers of native populations fighting against what would have at that time been clone troopers and TK troopers, which is exactly what we see on screen. From a practical standpoint, the solution is fairly simple. Raw military power. Bringing a Star Destroyer in orbit, for example, and shelling an area from space, or sending down a battalion of stormtroopers or TK troopers to simply clear out any resistance is the most obvious solution, and it gets the job done, however, at a price. Not only do you risk losing valuable resources, from a military standpoint, the lives of soldiers aren't completely disposable, you also risk alienating the population, which may look poorly on actions like this, especially when they're carried out against worlds that were loyal to the Republic during the war. Now, the Empire, however, did have a propaganda angle to spin this, at least for people not living on these worlds. The Empire would often claim that these worlds maintained separatist ideals, whether or not they did. The idea behind this being that they were painting this as a continuation of the Clone Wars. The separatists were demonized within the Republic and accused of starting the conflict, and the idea that these military operations were simply there to prevent a second Clone Wars was actually fairly popular among the people of the galaxy, many of whom had seen the raw, destructive capability of a galactic war during the conflict and were sort of eager to prevent that from repeating itself. And like we saw in the show, that's basically how things went down. The Empire rolls in, they wheel out excessive force and spend some time clamping down on resistance movements there, establishing their own government and their own sort of militia made up of Imperial troops, and then move on to the next world that's being a little bit of a thorn in their side. This was basically the entire existence of the Imperial military for the first few years of the Galactic Empire, going world to world, clearing out any separatist holdouts, and clamping down on worlds that didn't necessarily support Imperial ideals. It wasn't for a few years that the Imperial forces could actually begin policing the galaxy the way they had been intended to be used, as a very large military police force. So this is how the Galactic Empire handled worlds that didn't necessarily wave the Imperial flag when they showed up, but there were actually a surprising number of worlds that were fairly pro-Empire at its conception. There were many worlds that saw the rise of the Empire as a brave new age for the galaxy, and if you'd like to learn about why some of these worlds supported the Galactic Empire even when it would ultimately end up being against their best interest, I'll leave a link up here to my video on that. And I'd like you to let me know down in the comments whether you think there's a better way the Empire could have been handling things like Separatist holdouts. Do you think there's a more efficient or effective way to bring them into the fold, or do you think the best way possible is just throw a massive military equipment at them until they fall? And if you have anything else you'd like to see me cover in Star Wars, leave it down below in the comments. Last but not least, if you enjoyed this video, head down below, hit the like button, subscribe button, and the bell icon so you get notified when I upload new videos. So for Sci-Fi Deep Dive, I'm Colin, and I will see you next time.